Good afternoon, and welcome to a program that I know will be inspiring for all of us. I'm Rebecca Pallmeyer. I'm the Chief Judge for this court, the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. As you know, I'm the first woman to hold this position in the court's 200-year history. I view it as an extraordinary honor and almost a calling to walk forward with the court during these last very challenging months. This is the first time in my life I've been the first woman anything. I wasn't the first daughter in my family. I have an older sister and an older brother. I wasn't the first person in my family to attend college. And although I was the first and only woman to attend law school, my parents made clear this was no big deal. They expected no different achievement from their daughters than from their sons. The judge I clerked for was the first woman to serve on the Minnesota Supreme Court, but I was not her first female clerk. I wasn't the first woman at my law firm, or at the Illinois Human Rights Commission, where I served as an ALJ, or as a magistrate judge of this court, or a district judge. Women were not the majority, they still are not, but I was not alone. And I would not even be the first chief judge of this court were it not for the action of my predecessor, Ruben Castillo, who chose to step aside a few months before he otherwise would have, so that I would become chief judge before I aged out of the position. In fact, that decision was announced on March 8, International Women's Day, 2019. That announcement was a bit of a surprise, and it sometimes feels undeserved. But the significance of being the first woman in this job is not lost on me. I thought I would do all kinds of fun stuff like receptions and luncheons and panels like this one. Instead, the last few months have been very difficult for all of us. I read yesterday that 1 in 3 Americans has lost a loved one to COVID-19. We who work in the court system have been privileged to retain our jobs and our income, but many have not. And even within our court, there has been loss of income, loss of loved ones, and the struggle of caring for and providing education for family members. Any chief judge would try hard to be sensitive to this. For me, it is doubly important to be sensitive to the difficulties that people are facing, particularly women and women lawyers who have been hit with a disproportionate share of household responsibility, the need to care for children and elderly relatives, and employment difficulties. I see women and men working hard to keep it together, and I can offer a bit of advice. Here it is. Most of you are doing the best you can. Continue to do your best. That's all that can be asked of you. It isn't going to be perfect, and you cannot do everything. Even when there is no pandemic, there are only 24 hours in the day. With the pandemic, it seems like there are even fewer. There is light at the end of this tunnel, ladies and gentlemen, and I believe it is getting brighter. In the meantime, keep your eyes and your heart focused on what really has to be done, and forgive yourself when it is not perfect. In a few minutes, I'm going to introduce our panel of speakers. I know you will be impressed by their accomplishments, as I am. Before I do that, let's spend a moment or two thinking about some remarkable women who will not appear on panels and whose names are not in the history book. I'm thinking about our mothers and our grandmothers, women who never had opportunities to blossom fully. I'm thinking about women who had those opportunities and worked hard and paved the way, but were sidetracked by family responsibilities and never made partner and never reached the executive office. This is my mother, not famous or perfect, but pretty wonderful. There are so many remarkable women that we've never heard of. Not all saints, not all geniuses, but women who deserve recognition. If you have a minute, do what I did a few days ago and Google unsung heroines. You are going to find some remarkable stories. Let's start with somebody you have heard of. I think we're ready. Bessie Coleman. You have heard of her because we've all been on Bessie Coleman Drive on our way to O'Hare. Bessie was of mixed race. She was African American and Native American. She began her career as a manicurist, but then moved to France to get a pilot's license in 1920. Ahead of her time in every way, Coleman refused to perform her impressive plane tricks, including a loop-de-loop, for segregated stadiums back in the 1920s. She died in 1926 when her plane flipped over and she fell 3,000 feet to the earth. Even then, Bessie wasn't widely recognized. It was another 80 years before she was inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. Have you heard of Henrietta Wood? Henrietta was freed from slavery in the mid-19th century, but nevertheless found herself captured and returned to forced labor. When she finally was again emancipated, she sued the man who had enslaved her and won. As a Black woman, Henrietta Wood could not even testify in her own lawsuit, but an all-white jury awarded her $2,500 in 1878. That's the verdict form you see on the right. She used the money to send her son, Arthur Sims, to law school. Arthur Sims was one of the first African Americans to graduate from Northwestern's law school in 1889. As children, we all learned that Eli Whitney changed the face of American production when he invented the cotton gin in 1793. In fact, the cotton gin was the brainchild of a woman, Catherine Littlefield Green, who lived from 1755 to 1814. The gin was Catherine's idea, but in those days, women didn't get to take out patents. But here's one who did a few decades later, Margaret Knight. You've never heard of her, but you've used her invention. She realized that grocery bags were difficult to use because they didn't have a flat bottom, so she did something about it. She invented a grocery bag with a flat bottom, and what you see on the right of that picture is one of the earliest paper bag plants. Margaret lived in the mid-1800s, and she was the first woman to be awarded a U.S. patent. She ended up with 89 patents in her lifetime. And finally, one more, just a fun story. Princess Katulan. You've heard of the 13th century Mongol leader Kublai Khan. Princess Katulan was his niece. The princess was described by Marco Polo as the greatest warrior in Khan's army. Princess Katulan told her uncle that she would marry any man who could wrestle her and win. If they lost, they had to give her 100 horses. She died unmarried with 10,000 horses. Now let's talk about some modern day heroines, the members of our very impressive panel. Jessica Scheller, our moderator. She's the chief of the Advice, Business, and Complex Litigation Division of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. During Ms. Scheller's career in public service, she has successfully defended against challenges to Illinois' campaign finance reform laws and the Cook County Blair Holt assault weapons ban. She serves on the board of the Federal Bar Association and is also the Vice President for Action and Policy on the Executive Board for Illinois and the National Organization for Women. She's the co-founder of the Women's March Chicago, and she was its president and chair when the organization staged several large-scale, peaceful demonstrations in Grant Park during 2017 and 2018. Michelle Lipkowitz is a partner at Saul Ewing in Baltimore. Ms. Lipkowitz focuses her practice on commercial litigation, white-collar defense, and government investigations. She has extensive experience before various administrative bodies and in state and federal courts throughout Maryland and across the country. And she represents clients from a broad range of industries. She has a laundry list of awards and honors, including just a few, including named one of the most influential Black lawyers by Savoy Magazine in 2015 and again in 2018, and one of the nation's best advocates 40 under 40 by the National Bar Association in 2013. Our next panelist, Ava Harder, is the Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Officer of Whirlpool Corporation, the world's leading kitchen and laundry appliance company. She oversees some 450 legal, environmental, health and safety, sustainability, and security professionals around the globe, advises the board and the CEO, and assists the company on legal, corporate, and business matters. Ava joined Whirlpool last fall from Owens Corning, where she had served since 2015 as Senior Vice President General Counsel. She has had a series of corporate counsel roles since her graduation from Northwestern University, and she has other ties to our city as well. She and her husband have a daughter who's studying engineering at Northwestern and a son who graduated from the University of Chicago. Kimberly Fox is the first African-American woman to lead the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, the country's second largest prosecutor's office. Ms. Fox's vision is to build the most just, equitable, and transparent prosecutor's office in the country by working proactively to make all communities safe while investing in policies to address the underlying drivers of contact with the criminal justice system. State's Attorney Fox has brought substantial progress in priority areas, including wrongful convictions, bond reform, transparency, and gun violence. Born and raised in Cabrini Green on Chicago's near north side, she's a graduate of the Southern Illinois University, where she earned her BA in political science and a JD from the School of Law. Finally, My friend, Judge Amy St. Eve, who served as a district judge in this court from 2002 until 2018, when she was appointed United States Circuit Court Judge for the 7th Circuit in 2018. Judge St. Eve has served on several committees of the United States Judicial Conference, the governing body of the federal courts. She's also served as our circuit's representative to the Federal Judges Association. She chairs the 7th Circuit's Committee on Pattern Jury Instructions. She's a member of the American Law Institute, member of several local and national legal organizations, and she teaches trial advocacy as an adjunct professor at Northwestern's Law School. Before ascending to the bench, Judge St. Eve was senior counsel for litigation at Abbott Laboratories. Before that, she was an assistant United States attorney in this district. After 2 years as associate independent counsel for the Whitewater Independent Counsel Investigation in Little Rock, Arkansas. And before that, she practiced law with the firm of Davis Polk and Wardwell in New York City. I'm happy to have introduced this wonderful panel, and I'm looking forward to what I know will be a very illuminating experience for all of us. So I think we're ready to hear from our panelists, Ms. Scheller. I'm sorry, our moderator, Ms. Scheller.
Thank you, Chief Judge Pallmeyer, for your remarks, but also for your trailblazing leadership. We appreciate your participation in this program on International Women's Day. Before we dive in, I'd also like to thank our panelists, the program chairs of the Federal Bar Association, our FBA President Morgan Hurst, and our excellent planning committee, including Lindsay Jenkins of the U.S. Attorney's Office and Nancy DePodesta of Saul, Ewing, Arnstein, and Lair. A lot of work went into planning this program, and we hope that you enjoy it. And with that said, we could spend hours interviewing each of these women, and so I'm going to get right to it. When reflecting on becoming a judge, now Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor mused, whatever I had accomplished to arrive at this point, the role I was about to assume was vastly more important than I was. Each of you is a leader in your respective fields. And while we could spend hours with each of you, we have 1 hour and 20 minutes. So I'm going to dive in and get to the bottom of how each of you made it to the top. And I'm going to do that by starting with Judge St. Eve, who typically is in the position of asking me questions when we meet. And I take unique pleasure.
Be nice.
Oh, be nice. In getting to ask you some questions. So Judge St. Eve, can you identify a catalyst moment which changed the trajectory of your career for the better?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to participate today. It's a real honor to be here with such esteemed panelists. I think one of the events that really changed the course of my career was when I was working at Davis Polk and Wardwell in New York City. I was in the litigation department. I knew I wanted to do some type of litigation, but I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And one day I volunteered with one of the attorneys who was on the equivalent of the CJA panel and ended up representing an individual who had been charged in federal court. And I really, from then on, got the public service bug and knew from that point on that I wanted to shift gears and find the right public service career. And I have spent almost my entire career in public service since then, but that was a real catalyst for me.
Ava, same question to you. I doubt that many of us begin our careers envisioning ourselves as being the general counsel of Whirlpool. Was there a moment that changed your trajectory?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think there were a couple moments, first to say, and I also, before I begin, I want to just say what an honor it is to be on this panel with such extraordinary women, and also just want to wish everyone a happy International Women's Day. I think it's a very important day. So talking about, and I think this is probably relevant for everyone. It's a milestone, it's a catalyst, but also a difficult time. I think the most important time for me was when I failed. I mean, I utterly failed. And I think Bill Gates once said that it's fine to celebrate success, but it's more important to heed the lessons of failure. I had always been somewhat successful. I was passionate. I cared about my job. I, worked very hard to know what I was doing to grow and expand. And I had gone from a number of different jobs, growing jobs, promotions, and I'd always been recruited. People had sought me out, and I had taken the next step. Yes, it was a new step, and I met the challenge. At some point, I took a new challenge, which was to be the general counsel of a joint venture between 2 Fortune 50 companies that was intended to be a huge trajectory to a new, future company, basically, in the digital space. And it utterly failed. And I won't go too much into that, but I found myself in a situation where I was more or less going to be out of a job. I'm the breadwinner for my family. I did not know what I was going to do. I felt like I had failed, that I made the wrong choice taking that chance. And I started calling upon a lot of my former colleagues, contacts, friends, other ones saying, do you know of something? Is there something, can you introduce me to someone? I called recruiters. I went so many different ways, and I had never done anything like that. It was very uncomfortable. I was very insecure. I was almost willing to take any job at that point. And then one of my contacts put me in contact with a CEO of Owens Corning. Said, you should meet this woman. And we sat and talked a number of times, and it didn't take very long for me to start getting other offers, very significant offers, which, recognized my experience, but then also to get the offer to be the general counsel of Owens Corning. And I think the biggest lesson I learned there is, one, sometimes you need to really fail and reach out and see what you're made out of. And I think the other important thing is, we as women have a lot of relationships, a lot of contacts, but we like to help others. I don't think we as much want to ask for help. And I had never been in a position when I was really asking people for help, for those contacts, for seeing if they could talk to people. And it led to probably the greatest, change in my career. And so I encourage everyone to take that lesson, and you have relationships for a reason, and they rely on you, and you should rely on them as well.
Thank you, Ava. That is really insightful. I think we so often view our trajectories as upward, 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 and sometimes it takes falling down to reach the right location. Madam State's Attorney, in a similar vein, has there ever been a time where you felt professionally stymied, or just that your goals or objectives or dreams were out of reach?
Well, let me start, as the other panelists did, by thanking you for having me as a part of this esteemed group on this special day, recognizing the work of women who came before us. Yeah, I mean, I much like Ava, thought that I was on one career path. I grew up in public housing. I very much, when I went to law school, believed that I was going to go to be able to set myself and my family up very well, and I did insurance defense work in-house coming right out of law school, doing workers' comp, and I lasted a good 9 months before I realized that this was not for me, and was successful. It just didn't feel heart fulfilling. And I had a friend who worked at the Cook County Public Guardian's Office representing kids in the foster care system, who, again, just like was just said, said, do you need help? Can I introduce you to people? And I ended up working there. And it was fundamentally, it changed everything. I didn't know what the Public Guardian's Office was before I reached out there. And as a lawyer on behalf of children who had been abused or neglected, who had grown up in circumstances very much like the one that I had grown up in, it was affirming to me to be able to give back, particularly to a population who didn't see themselves reflected in courthouses, and having grown up not having a mirror of what it meant to be a Black lawyer, particularly in public housing. To be their lawyer was like a gift, and was able to transition into the state's attorney's office in a program that they had established just dealing with child protection cases as a pioneer in their family law program. And working through that for a number of years, I got promoted to a supervisor in our juvenile delinquency division, and really felt at that point that I had reached the top of what I could do, but had much more to give. And so it wasn't so much that I had felt stymied. What I had felt was that I had a lived experience that could have a bigger impact on a broader group of people if I stepped into another role. But that role didn't exist as it stood. It didn't exist there. which meant that I had to leave. I had to deviate. I left to become chief of staff to the president of the county board, which was unlike anything I had done. I'd spent at that point 12 years doing child protection, juvenile justice law. And then all of a sudden, I was the chief of staff to the president of the second largest county in the country. At that time, with a $4.5 billion budget. And I had under my portfolio facilities management, homeland security, economic development, all things I had no idea about how to do, but the skill set that I learned at the state's attorney's office prepared me. And it was in that role, again, that I realized that my lived experience, that breadth of expertise that I'd built, could also be served if I went back to the place that meant so much to me in the state's attorney's office, and brought the perspective, not just from a legal perspective, but from a lived experience perspective of someone who's known people who's come in and out of the justice system, people who've been victims of crime, people who have also committed crime, and bring that experience into leadership. And that's when I decided to run for office back in 2016. And it was, again, a series of what was the purpose of my life? What would be most fulfilling? I like Judge St. Eve, public service is, I think it's a calling that sometimes you don't want to hear, especially when you have student loans coming. But it was beyond the pocketbook. I could sleep at night believing that the work that I did mattered in some small way. It's not always fulfilling. It's not always, people aren't always grateful for the sacrifices that you make, but it has to be because you believe that there's a purpose in you doing it. And I've been very blessed and fortunate to feel that my career has been purpose-driven.
I think it's so important to like what you do. And it's important that you point that out, because you can make an awful lot of money doing something that doesn't feel good to you, or you can work in public service and not be able to always make ends meet. But I think the law is a jealous mistress, as they always say, and it's so important to find a place where you feel at home, where you feel that there's passion in the work that you do. Turning now to Michelle, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your former self?
Oh, gosh. So looking back about the 20 years I've been doing this, the two main points that I would remind myself of are, first of all, I really need to exude more confidence than I have at the time. I don't feel that we as women have the luxury of not doing so. We can't look like deer in the headlights. We can't be stuttering and, confused about our words. We have to just commit and exude that confidence, whether you have it or not, kind of along the lines of, fake it till you make it. What's interesting about that is at least with myself, I don't know otherwise at this point. I've done it for so many years that I don't know other than exuding that confidence. Exuding that confidence is critical to instilling confidence in others. In order for your clients to believe in you, to follow your advice, they need to have confidence in you and your abilities. If you're not exuding it, nobody else is going to buy it either. That's definitely, I think, first and foremost. I would also say getting out of my own way. I think as a younger person, I probably thought about other people and other situations being the impediment to my success. And what I've learned is that I am the only impediment to my success. Nobody else can stop me. It's just me. So I need to get out of my own way. We as women statistically have significantly more self-doubt than men. And, we'll have 15 of the 10 criteria for a job, as we all know. A man may have 2, but they are convinced they're going to have the job. We just rationalize 12 different ways why we shouldn't even apply. So I really do believe that we need to get out of our own ways.
Thank you. We named this program touching upon how each of you is a vanguard or a thought leader in your respective industry. And of course, one of the signature vanguards in the legal field was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was well known for her powerful dissent. As a lawyer, she often took an unexpected path to achieve victory for her causes, including advocating on behalf of men to secure rights for women. Judge St. Eve, what can lawyers learn from her about the road less traveled when trying to blaze a new trail?
I think we can all learn from her to stand up for what you believe in, to do what you think is right, even though that can be difficult. It may not be the popular decision. You might get flack for it or pushback for it, but you have to go to sleep at night. And the only way we can make change on certain things is to keep pushing forward and doing what we think is right. And she's a perfect example of that, rather from her majorities and her dissents. You could tell that she always ruled the way that she thought was right and thought the law required. And we can all learn from that.
When I began practicing, there was a big emphasis, and there were many women's seminars on, covering up who you were in the office space. And I received a lot of advice to that effect. Don't have pictures of your children up in your office. If you're going to be taking a child to the pediatrician, just say you have an appointment. Don't explain, don't complain, was sort of the advice that we were given to sort of minimize our own personal identities in the workplace. And over the past few years, I've been seeing a trend away from that type of personality management, if you will, or the wearing of masks in the workplace. So, Madam State's Attorney, as each of us brings our own personal identity to our professional roles, what can you look at in terms of your time in office as changes you've made or accomplishments that you've been able to reach, which you credit specifically to your personal identity?
Well, that's a great question. I was going to say, I hope that's not the lessons you learned working in the office. That was somewhere else she learned those lessons. I think what's been really important to me in my leadership is leaning all the way into who I am and unapologetically. The reality is of elected prosecutors across the country, there are about 2,400 elected prosecutors. 79% of them are white men, 79%, 16% are white women, 4% are men of color, and less than 1% are women of color. And there are about 27 Black women across the country who do what I do, 27. And when you ascend into or go into a field, again, as a woman that is heavily male dominated, there was this training that I got as a young lawyer, to try to blend in. And there's nothing about me that looks like 79% of the people who hold this role. I'm not going to blend in. And I came to this work based on the lived experience of being a Black woman from public housing in the city of Chicago, impacted by a system that I was now into. And so it's incredibly important to me to lead that way and to lead that way unapologetically. I am made up of multiple identities all at once, not just the demographics, but I am a mom of 4 teenage girls who are watching me every day. Yes, Michelle, 4 teenage girls. Between 15 and 18, who are watching me every day. And so the things that how I show up in this space, not just in the office, but they're looking at how to navigate the world. And what I want them to do is to take up space in the totality of who they are. That is why I felt that I was uniquely qualified to do this. The law is one thing, right? The set of experiences that I bring to this on top of the law is completely different, and it shapes my perspectives, my policies. And so I've done things in the office like create our, first ever employee resource groups, because we didn't have it before. Because, singling yourself out because you're a woman or LGBTQ or Asian was frowned upon. I wanted people to embrace that, what it meant to bring these identities into the workplace and to hold us accountable to make sure that we are addressing those identities and the unique needs that they have, to celebrate that diversity. It meant hiring the first ever chief diversity officer. We're the largest law firm, if you will, in the state. And when I came in the office, about 60% of our workforce were women. and yet less than 25% of our leadership were women, our senior leadership. How does that work? And so it's like, you have to be very intentional. So we brought in our chief diversity officer to make sure that we were intentional about looking at diversity in hiring, retention, because we lose so many women who feel like they've hit that ceiling, and promotion. We also hired the first EEO officer. In law enforcement, particularly in the office that I grew up in, I'd seen a lot related to sexual harassment that went unaddressed because it was just assumed that that was part of the culture. Bringing on an EEO officer to address these issues and having our workforce have a place to go to when issues arose, and feeling confident that something would happen was very important to me. So it was those lived experiences that said, how can I come in and create an office environment that is inclusive, that celebrates diversity, and that is intentional about making sure that we're addressing equity. Last thing I'll say is, when I came in, as I said, less than 25% of our senior leadership or leadership throughout the office were women, despite being 60% of the office. We've now flipped that, and it now mirrors about 60% of our leadership in the office are women, proportionate to the number of women in our office. And that comes with intentionally working to do so.
You know, it's funny that you raised that, Madam State's Attorney, because I can say in my first at least 10 years of practice, there was not a woman above me as a partner. When I was in the private sector, there wasn't anybody. And so it was difficult to find role models in that respect. And very recently, when you named our new first assistant, we now have entire chains of command within the office in the civil division, where from line ASA up through the state's attorney, it is only women who are in the chain of command, which is not necessarily a necessity, but such a refreshing change for me from where I began, where there was no one to look to. And Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you now, because I know that you're also in charge of diversity and inclusion efforts at Paul Ewing. What accomplishments have you been able to make in the private sector based upon your personal identity and your position?
Excellent. First of all, I have to say, Kim, I have 2 girls in my house, one of whom is a preteen right now, the other one's 10. And there are many nights that I wonder how those 2 are going to make it through the night. So kudos to you. I will say, first of all, so I practice, I vice chair our litigation group, and I'm a full-time litigator, but one of my side gigs is being our firm-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion partner. So I focus on all things DE&I at the firm. And how I got there is an interesting part of the story. So I credit my background as a woman and a mom to my drive to increase the number of women and diverse lawyers in practice. When I got to my firm, I was a lateral partner from another firm. I got there a little over 10 years ago. Within a couple months, I was the only diverse partner at the firm. So I'm the ripe old age of 35 and a lateral who's been there a couple months, and it's just me. So I didn't have diversity, sponsorship, and mentoring from that perspective. It was then that I was determined to fix the problem. So I came in, and the firm was amazingly supportive of revamping all of our then diversity and inclusion programming, such that we now have a very, very robust program. We have diversity and inclusion and diversity, equity, and inclusion committee now. We have multiple employee resource groups. Diversity, equity, inclusion theories are really, the tentacles flow throughout our entire firm, from every policy, procedure, hiring, recruiting, you name it, from every aspect. I will also say, and up to, I parlayed my experience into a different role so I could create opportunities for others to lead. So that's why I'm now the diversity, equity, and inclusion partner. Most importantly, referring back to my comment about being the only about 10 years ago, we now have dozens of Black lawyers at the firm, dozens and dozens of diverse lawyers, and we now have even 10 Black partners. What has really been rewarding for me is also having, I guess about 2 years ago, when I became a vice chair of the litigation department, was the first time that we had a diverse lawyer in a compensation setting role. Prior to that, never one. And then as of January of this year, prior to which, and our firm just had its 100-year anniversary, prior to January, we had never had a diverse lawyer on our executive committee. That has now changed as well with myself and one of my good friends, Al Coleman. So a lot of progress over a relatively short period of time if we look at the statistics and the law, but also just to harken back to what Kim said, it's partially because of my background and personal experiences, but it's also partially because I am a mother and I refuse to be the one who hid having kids and making up excuses. You could not come anywhere near my office and not see crayons and pictures and paint and what have you everywhere. Everyone knows I'm a mother. I embrace it. And I think it's really important to model that for my younger colleagues and for all the people who say, oh, it's great that you do that in spite of having kids. I correct them. It's not in spite of having kids. It's because I have these two little girls watching everything I do, as Kim said.
Thank you. Ava, I'd like to turn to you. You have something of a unique backstory as well, and I'm wondering whether you've ever felt like your personal identity has been an impediment in your legal career.
Yeah, it's interesting. And one, you were talking about how when you started, how you were told how to dress or how to set up your office, so you were included and considered professional. And it's really, my background, I'm an immigrant, and I'm also a woman. And I think because of those two things, I'm kind of a street fighter, and that's just how I've always been. I started as a litigator, and I fight. And I also maybe wasn't as aware of what these kind of rules were of how to act as a woman, especially as an attorney, as a first attorney in my family. I didn't really know, and what I was supposed to do, and maybe I didn't pay as much attention as I should have to some of those things. But one thing, and I also love clothes, and I love dressing up. I've always been more of a girly girl versus anything else. And I went into my first federal case in a district court in Cleveland wearing a red suit. And the judge at that time, and this is how much things have changed, told me to go home and change, because that was the scarlet letter, because you were supposed to come in wearing blue or black or gray. And of course I did. And one, I felt like I completely failed my client, but I came back, and I can't even tell you how much some respect that years later I found out people had for me, and one, how I handled that, but also, that maybe I wasn't as aware of how you were supposed to come to at least this judge's court. But that kind of attitude also followed me when I went into in the corporate world, because of I think of the way I actually probably didn't appreciate the politics as much, and there was some kind of aspect you needed to respect the hierarchy, and especially it was all men. I had no women bosses or anyone above me, so respect the hierarchy. Don't speak up, don't be a street fighter, don't point out things that are wrong, how you do that. And one, I've learned a little bit of how to work through the politics in the corporate world, but at the other hand, I think that actually allowed me again to gain some respect. And then also I think things have changed. I mean, you started saying I think there's more inclusion now, more openness to different ways of approaching things. There's not this way is the only way you advance in your career, how you have to act, how you have to talk to, who you have to talk to. I mean, I think you need to understand the politics and how things work in a company, but I think there's also, I'm watching the change, and I believe, hopefully I've been part of that change.
Thank you. I'm sure you have been. I regret that I have to do this, but because we're offering CLE credit, I must pause and give all of you a code. Today's CLE code is 30821. 30821. But now that I have done that, we are to my favorite section of the day, which the committee has dubbed the Cinderella section. And I think it's particularly apt during these pandemic times. We've all been living through an extraordinary situation where either we or our colleagues have children learning in the home. I have watched the light leave my colleagues' eyes as we're in the middle of a really in-depth conversation about an election case, and we heard the gentle notes of a recorder begin in the background because her new office mates are elementary school students that she has to make sure get onto the Zooms on time. And while that didn't bother me in the least, I know how challenging that was for her and how difficult it has been for everyone while we're trying to be professionals while also having our family members all around us all of the time. And that sort of brings me to division of labor within the home. Justice Ginsburg famously did not cook, and I share that honor with her. Nobody wants to eat anything I've cooked, and nobody ever asks me what's for dinner because I'll just throw a handful of wheat thins at them and call it a day. So I'm going to turn to you, Judge St. Eve. Who does what to keep things moving at your house?
Well, before I answer that, I want to applaud everybody's efforts that they've just talked about in terms of promoting and bringing more women and more diversity on board, both at the trial court and at the appellate court. I'm amazed days I go into court and it's a sea of white men out there. I'll come out on the appellate court and it'll be a panel of 3 women judges and everybody arguing before us is a white man that day. So I certainly applaud all of your efforts and keep going. In terms of division of labor, so I have 3 children who are older now. I thought with the pandemic, when it started, my husband and I thought we were about to become empty nesters, and suddenly we had 2 college age, 1 high school, and 1 boyfriend living with us. So although they weren't elementary, they still brought their share of challenges and needs during the time. I learned very early on, and Judge Pallmeyer, if you are still listening, I'm going to steal a line that I've heard Chief Judge Pallmeyer use before because it really sums it up. And her advice to young women was to make sure that you marry well. And by that, she didn't mean marry somebody who financially is well off, but marry somebody who, or bring on your partner who shares the workload with you. And I learned very early on when I had my first child, when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, that the way my husband and I, who's a professional as well, not a lawyer, but a professional, has a demanding career as well, but we decided, and I insisted early on, that I would go into work first and he would take the morning shift and I would get home at night and he could work as late as he wanted. There is nothing more stressful when you have kids who are in daycare or in after school programs and you're trying to either rush to drop them off on time or rush to pick them up on time, and you can't do it at both ends of the day. So from the get-go, and I still get in very early. I'm still up and out before my husband's up in the morning because that's how we always divided the labor. And even though we don't have kids at home anymore, I still follow that schedule. So I do cook, but he does plenty of his things. And our kids were all in travel soccer. He took care of most of that. And we just divided things and made it work. But one person cannot do everything and shouldn't do everything.
So Judge St. Eve, does this account for your early bird 8:30 a.m. call that you maintained in the Northern District?
I've been at work for about 3 hours by then. It felt like lunchtime to me.
Every other judge started at 9 or 9:15, but Judge St. Eve was always at 8:30. And I was wondering, is this related to family management or does she just not want anyone to preempt her call?
It was more the family management.
So, Madam State's Attorney, you've disclosed to us that you have 4 teenagers in the house. And I think that necessarily begs the question, who's doing what around there to keep things moving?
It's funny. It's as though my husband heard you saying this and came down the stairs just now to see once I leave meeting whether we'll be happy. No, I married well. it is, you know, the age of my children now, when you talked about just any daycare, I had PTSD of trying to get there on time and the dollar a minute that it would cost to be late. And as a public servant lawyer, I could not afford $1 a minute to be late. And so, you know, my husband and I tried to work that out. As the kids have gotten older, our youngest is 15. There's like, you got to learn how to cook, fend for yourself. And, you know, those are skills. You know, my oldest is going to go off to college. You know, I don't want you waiting until the last moment to figure out how to prepare a meal. And if it's something as simple as rice and some type of protein, you got to figure it out. And I stopped feeling guilty because I tried very heartily to create a world that I didn't have growing up. My mother was a single mother. We were on public aid. And so I had this image of once I got married that I would have this like life where I was baking cookies and being a lawyer and having it all. And as Judge St. Eve just said, that's not real. But I tried for as long as I could. And when I start peeling back and saying, I'm not cooking tonight, you know, you guys fend for yourself, there was a tremendous amount of guilt, that was associated with that. And my husband, you know, God bless him, would say, you know, give me some recipes, I can make it. And, you know, 3 ingredients in, he can't find the ladle. He's like frustrated. And then like there's a mess and he's in the corner of the room looking at me. And so he would just give up and the kids would be like, just give up. Or he has a very light seasoning hand, so he doesn't cook very well. And so the kids wouldn't eat it. And so I've learned, you know, to let them on their own, they won't starve. He takes them to doctor's appointments. He takes them to cheer practice. He takes them to band. He's very good at, you know, being the chauffeur. This pandemic has been a test of all of that. You know, I'm in my living room that we call also the dean's office because I do have 4 home remote learning high schoolers who are here. My husband is also a professional, but had been working from home before this. And so we've now invaded his space. And trying to find that balance of all of it, but really feeling that this is the age where more personal responsibility for their management falls on them. And I should also say we got help. As wonderful as my husband is and tries to be, I also lost the guilt of hiring someone to come help us. And so we do have someone that comes to the home every couple of weeks to do a deep clean because in all of it we have to do, some things drop. And I've disabused myself of feeling as though that I'm not entitled to have the help to make this household work. And so I pay for that too. We pay for that as well.
You can tell your husband that I also pretend like I can't cook so that I get to leave the scene and abandon the recipe. I think we might be on the same page with regard to our strategies there. Michelle, I'd like to take you back to a time where I believe you had young children in home and a working spouse. What did you have to do to make that situation work while you were in private practice?
Said young children may roll through at any minute. They did go to school today, so they will be clothed, which is not always the case during a pandemic, apparently. The first thing I'll do is actually reference one of the discussions about help. Once I realized that using my resources and reaching out to my network was a sign of strength and not weakness, things got so much better, from neighbors and babysitters, from online, sittercity.com, care.com, you name it, to calling in a lifeline of other working moms. My mom tribe is strong. That has been actually the most productive force. One of my favorite stories, I was talking to Nancy DiPodesta, one of the planners and one of my partners here. I have a very good friend who is a facial plastic surgeon here in Baltimore, and she had a last-minute trip abroad. And although her husband is in the house, it was easier to call in a lifeline and call me to help with her daughter because I knew games, practices, birthdays, who's present, which, where, when, and how. That's how I've been able to make a lot of that work. But that required me to accept help and to use help, which is not a bad thing. Otherwise, I have been a little gangster on pushing tasks down to my children. Sloan is all of 12, Sage is 10, and I've convinced myself that with the goal being to prepare them for success in the real world outside of this house, that there are life skills they need. That began with the trash and the recycling, and now they actually both do their own laundry with some help. It's not perfect, and I have to let go of the need to have it perfect, but they do that. And they cook as well, and real food, salmon and spinach. They'll eat salads without salad dressing. I thought it was a scam for a while for the sugar and the dressing, but no, they eat it just a straight salad. So being able to not hold on to the responsibility for everything and not psychologically beat myself up because I wasn't able to do absolutely everything for everybody has really been helpful for me.
That is also some great advice. I'm mapping out new tasks my children can begin when they get home today.
I have some spreadsheets I can share. I can happy to share.
Please do. We'll include that in the CLE material. Ava, how has motherhood influenced your professional role, if at all?
Yeah, so I think if it's influenced it, it's been just giving me a little bit more humility. Going into the office years, decades ago with my kids' breakfast on my shoulder and not knowing it until halfway through the day. Definitely you can't take things too seriously when that happens. And it was interesting. You probably all experienced this with your kids, but my daughter used to say when she was young, "You're not the boss of me." And that was when she was 2 or 3. She started saying that again when she was a teenager. And it had very different meaning you can't treat me like you think you treat people at work. And it actually had the opposite effect on me when she said that to me, because I realized if that's how you think I treat people at work, bossing, like I probably need to go to work and think a little bit differently on how I'm talking to people and treating it. And it did become a little bit, I learned from my kids as they learned from me. So that changed it a little bit. But I do have to say, when you have kids and you go through a lot, and even right now through COVID, the worries you have, it just gives you a different sense that, what's the worst thing that can happen in your work? You got to keep your ethics, keep your morals, keep your judgment. What are they going to do? Fire you? That would be nothing compared to anything happening to your kids. So there is a sense of freedom, I think, that you have and that you appreciate in other people around you too, that they have other worries, things are going on in their lives and they're here, they're with you in their professional life, being very professional. You are too, but you always kind of keep it in the back of your mind that there's other things potentially going on. And I think it just makes you all of us better professionals.
That's interesting. I would fear my daughter's feedback about how I should modify my workplace persona. I don't think she would mince any words at all.
Yep.
We'll have to see. So I'm going to transition now, and I'm going to give you another Justice Sotomayor quote, because as I was preparing for this, I found this particular piece of her reflections to be fascinating. This is a quote from her book, My Beloved World. "My first month as a judge, I was terrified. The very thought of taking my seat on the bench induced a metaphysical panic. I still couldn't believe that this had worked out as dreamed, and I felt myself almost an imposter meeting my fate so brazenly." Michelle, can you envision a time where you felt otherness or like you were the imposter in the room?
Absolutely. I would say that is actually the foundation of my need to focus on confidence, because the self-doubt, especially at the beginning of my career, you could drown in it. And the only way to swim was to really steel myself up. I still do it every time I'm in a new environment. For example, going on to our executive committee, I absolutely still had that self-doubt. but now I'm aware of it and I break it down. I use the Street Fighter-ness, the grit and that steel to really march forward, and I refuse to accept it. That's just how I think. Nobody else can make that choice for me. I have a choice all day, every day, how I react to others. So I'm going to control how I present myself, and I'm not going to let that get in my head, because that's a me issue. That's not a them issue.
Ava, same question.
Yeah, it's very much, and I think Michelle, you earlier said, you fake it until you make it. I mean, I think there's a lot of times you do that, and I think women have that more than men. I don't, I'm sure there's a spectrum on that, but it's a very interesting thing. When I in one of my executive roles, we did something called the 360. Maybe you guys have all done that. Or know about it, but you go to your colleagues. So they went to the rest of the executive committee and some of the people that worked for me, and kind of just pull it together of what made you effective and what made you positive, and where maybe from a team perspective you needed to work on it. And the common comment was that I sometimes believe I believe I'm an outsider. It wasn't what I said. Other people saw me as thinking of myself as an outsider. Now I'm just going to say I was the only woman on the executive committee, so I was an outsider, on one hand, and on the other, maybe I was doing it to myself, because if they made that comment, meant they didn't really view me as an outsider, except for that was how I viewed myself. And it was a little bit about the confidence and a little bit, but very much a learning experience, because only you can feel like an outsider. No one, they can't make you feel like an outsider. So it definitely was, a very strong learning experience, but it is something you have to work on every day.
I think it's funny that they were trying to tell you that you felt like an outsider. Wouldn't they have? So, Madam State's Attorney, as we've touched upon, you're the first Black woman to serve as the Cook County State's Attorney. And I'll frame the question this way. For those who do not work in the office and may not have as deep of an understanding, can you identify a time where you received pushback from the community or an organization which you perceive to be based on your identity as a Black woman?
Yeah. I mean, the work that we do, there's a heavy law enforcement component, and as well as the civil practice that we hold. But in law enforcement, it is traditionally a white male dominated field. We talk about me being the first Black woman state's attorney here in Cook County. There are 102 state's attorneys in the state of Illinois. I am the only Black one and the only Black woman. And so, you go to the State's Attorneys Association meetings and you look around and it's you. The reality is that from a criminal justice perspective, a lot of, the overrepresentation in our justice system as victims and as defendants are Black. Many of them come from the very neighborhoods like the one that I grew up in. And so when I got into this role, again, I leaned into that is a lived experience that I had, but for a number of people who had a real distance from those communities and preconceived notions about those communities and what they meant. And for many who only saw these communities in a courthouse, or only knew them, at their worst, when they saw a victim of a violent crime or a defendant. And so there are a set of assumptions that were made because of that lack of proximity. And because I lean so heavily into who I am and where I come from, there was that kind of, are you one of us or one of them? And so there was a choice that needed to be made in the field of what side are you on? And I struggle with that mightily because this is public service. This is public service. There is no sides. This is not a war. Our job is to try to have communities be healthy and thriving, and to want the best for every kid in every neighborhood to reach their fullest potential. And the mindset of some, and not all, of, it's us versus them. And to be a them in the group of us's, and to be told that you have to choose, was incredibly difficult. And it wasn't even so much a sense of imposter syndrome. There were times where I'm like, is this the day to fight this battle? Is this the day to, like, you know what? You done said that one too many times. And to not view being combative, the monikers of the angry Black woman, she's always got something to say. And that is an ongoing thing, particularly when you have a group of people who just haven't been diversified and have long-standing beliefs, and some of them even benign or innocuous to them that they may not see. And so the educating becomes exhausting sometimes, but you then recognize that I start from a place that we're all doing this for the good of the people that we serve, and that you are in this role, in this perspective, to better the profession. And that if you don't say, hey, this isn't a choice between us and them, that this is a public service, then the culture will continue as it is unabated, because it only changes when you push it back. And so, yeah, the law enforcement community has been long overdue for some real substantive diversity. And again, not just on gender and race, but really on lived experience and perspective, to be able to inform how we engage with the people that we serve. And it can be very lonely, it can be very exhausting, but it is also very necessary.
So briefly following up on that, do you have any advice for the younger lawyers who are watching the seminar today about how to survive and thrive when they feel like they're a them in the up group, trying to make change and meeting with resistance?
What I would say is, one, I don't sugarcoat. Sometimes it's very hard, and sometimes it can feel very alienating. Again, why we created the employee resource groups, because I remember being in the office and coming from a meeting, and someone said something that was terribly offensive about a community, and I don't even think that they meant to do it on purpose. And what you would do is you'd look in the hall and make eye contact with someone and be like, you heard that too? Like, and just wanting to be reaffirmed, wanted to be seen, to feel like you matter. And so what I tell young lawyers that I meet, who, particularly young lawyers of color, who are in predominant settings where they don't see themselves, the easiest thing would be to retreat. That is the easiest thing. The organization gets better by your presence, your full presence. Your full presence. That's why I said I encourage people not to emulate, and that's hard. We had a culture in the office where if you had to wear your hair pulled back, how you had to dress, the no red suits, Ava, we had that too. And I remember, when I came in, talking to someone, even how I wore my hair, like it had to be blown out, because it was determined to be neat. And I said, my hair is naturally curly. I'm going to wear my hair natural. And a young assistant came to me and said, you have no idea how long I've been straightening my hair. I lost my curl pattern because I didn't feel like I was accepted here. And this, after re-election, I changed my photo in the office to me and my curly hair so that the women can see me and see that that's okay here. And so what I would say to a young assistant or a young lawyer who is in a space in which they are a small minority, your presence matters. Your whole presence matters. And find resource groups, whether within your organization or in the larger bar communities. There's several bar groups that one could join to reaffirm you, to build you up. But retreat is easy. I think the infiltrating of these institutions so recently is because women, decided to, pull back, to leave. We censored ourselves, and didn't push. And I'm not saying that they weren't trying to, but it just sometimes the fight feels not worth it. But your presence matters, and so to hang in there and find resources outside of the organization to reaffirm and build up your skills.
Well, and I think you've touched upon an important point in the way that things are changing. It used to be that everyone was trying to shove themselves into the same mold to fit or fit in. And, you know, in our office leadership and throughout the community, I think there's a move toward opening the doors and accepting people the way they are and forcing acceptance of who we are, if you will, which is an important change, I think, even over the last 10 to 15 years. But it's definitely a change that I think we're seeing in the marketplace. And I have noticed your new picture. It looks great. Judge St. you practice in a slightly different setting. You know, we're practitioners who step up before the court, but you're a member of the court. Have you ever envisioned, or have you ever experienced, community pushback over your work on the bench?
Well, I certainly felt some when I went on the bench. It was 2002. I was 36 years old. I had 3 children who were 4, 2, and an infant. And the word and people were saying, oh, she's not going to be able to do this. She's too young. She's got young kids. How is she going to be able to do this? She's not going to be able to get things done, et cetera, et cetera. So there was definitely some pushback when I first went on the bench. And new judges in the courtroom always get some lawyers who come in and try to test them. But I think being a new young woman, I had even more lawyers coming in saying things that they would never say to my colleagues, ever. And did it until they learned that that wasn't going to work. So it just took time pushing back, speaking up, calling them out on it. I said to many a lawyer, I don't think you would say that to my colleague, Judge Kennelly, down the hall, would you? And eventually, you know, there might be 1 or 2 who would still try to do it later on, but most people understood after a while that that wasn't going to work. And boy, as Michelle said, that's where you really do have to dig down and find that confidence and just pull yourself up and reach for your support groups and move forward.
So I find that very interesting. You're sitting on the bench, and for those who haven't practiced in the Northern District, the dais is elevated. The judge is about 20 feet away from you. And even in that setting, you found that people were not affording you the same respect that they would your male peers.
Yes, not everybody by any means, but there were lawyers who would say things. I had very early on one male lawyer say to me, if you would just listen to me, you could learn something. I can tell you story and stories after that. So again, things that they would never say to one of my male colleagues. And especially when I went on the bench, the closest judge in age to me was 10 years older than I was. And nobody had really small kids like I did. And of course, you wouldn't hear if some of the male judges had small kids. It was only the female judge with the small kids. How could she do this?
So I won't ask you for the name of the practitioner, but do you remember who that was?
Oh, yes, I do.
I thought so. So, Judge St. Eve, I have a follow-up question for you then. As you may have heard over the weekend, the district court overseeing the Equal Rights Amendment litigation granted the National Archivist's motion to dismiss and said that, among others, the Illinois Attorney General's office did not have standing to seek ratification and inclusion of the Equal Rights Amendment within the Constitution based upon a time deadline that was established by Congress in 1982. Based upon your professional experiences and current vantage point, do federal practitioners in the Northern District that are women still face workplace barriers?
Oh, yes. I see it in the courtroom from the lack of female lawyers. You look at the numbers of lawyers coming in to argue appeals before the Seventh Circuit, and I've actually been looking at some of those numbers closely, and it's similar to the trial court. I bet you there's probably between 25 and 30% of the lawyers who come in general are women. And if you break out the government lawyers from that versus the private practice, the lawyers are significantly lower. We are seeing more and more female advocates come in from the state's attorney's office, thank you, the U.S. attorney's office, the municipal governments, but we're not seeing more and more coming in from the private firms, whether they're big firms or small firms. So yes, I do think there are still more challenges for women than there are for men in the workplace. And I would like to change that.
Well, I'm open to ideas. I'm ready for action. You let us know what we need to do and we'll start working on it. I think Michelle could probably put together a project management strategy for us all. I'm going to
try to
turn
do that at the district court to encourage women to take roles. And I said multiple times to the lead male trial lawyers, why don't you let the woman put a witness on? Why don't you let her do something? Jury wants to hear from her. So slowly we'll get there.
And was it effective? Did you find that they would heed your request?
With some, yes. Not everybody would, but certainly with some, yes.
Interesting. And that kind of is a good segue, I think, into the next section, which is about mentoring versus sponsoring and also, you know, frenemies in the workplace. Michelle, we've talked a little bit about advice you would give to your younger self, but when you're thinking about that brand new lawyer, what type of advice would you give to a new young lawyer about finding a mentor, finding a sponsor, and what that really looks like?
Absolutely. I would say, putting aside the need to hone your legal acumen and demonstrate that regardless of the environment you're working in, you've got to get up from behind your desk, you've got to get out, and you've got to get to know people. I think people artificially restrain what they see or who they see as mentors and sponsors, that they also have to be a woman or they also have to be a diverse woman. Mm-hmm. Some of my most useful and productive and critical sponsors and mentors over the years look nothing like me. I also am a big believer in you cannot have too many mentors and sponsors. There are times where somebody internal is a perfectly appropriate choice to go to for an issue. There are times where I should probably be talking to someone outside the building, still to this day. So I think getting out, the sooner you start getting out and getting to know people, the easier it is. You become abundantly less intimidated going to events and networking and just asking people to meet for a cup of coffee. It's the first couple times you ask, it may be awkward, but then you realize, especially when you're young and cute and shiny, that people really do want to get to know you and they do want to invest in you. Seize that opportunity. You never know where those relationships are going to lead you. So that's my advice on that.
So I'm going to turn to you. I think for younger attorneys in particular, they think that only, I'll say, people my vintage or older can be mentors or sponsors. So everyone, of course, wants the state's attorney to be their sponsor or, a judge to be their sponsor. But how can younger women start thinking about becoming mentors and sponsors for their peers?
I think it's really interesting, and this goes a little bit with what Michelle was saying. It's a very formal term, sponsor or mentor, and I'd say every single one of us probably got to where we got because somebody took a chance on us, maybe at least one person, if not more. And they were the people, they were the catalyst, they were the things that changed you. And I don't think it's a matter of age or experience. It's actually just being that person that believes in you, that sees your capability. So I would say for younger women, find those people that you're around. You don't need to get into a formal relationship, that you believe in somebody. They can be your same age. They could even be older than you. They could be, just find them, if you believe in them, don't just take the time and help them, give them the confidence, let them see things a different way and commit yourself, to helping them out. because we can all make huge differences when we really invest in somebody. And like I said, it doesn't really matter your, you know, your age, your experience, anything else, as long as you have that belief in somebody.
I think that's right. And for those who are new to the mentorship versus sponsorship conversation, the mentor will teach you and a sponsor will drag you along to make sure you also reach the next level. And so I think it's really important to seek out a sponsor, but to also be a sponsor when you have that opportunity. And I will turn it back to you, Madam State's Attorney. Can you identify someone who sponsored you or mentored you?
Yeah, I want to, what Michelle said, like you got to get from behind the desk. I think for me, you know, I spent a dozen years in the state's attorney's office, and what you find, particularly with government lawyers, your circle is like your government lawyer's circle. And what you realize is that there are only a certain number of positions that you can aspire to. And so, you know, you obviously would try to find someone within the organization to learn from. But I think what really helped me was, you know, I got into Leadership Greater Chicago a number of years ago. The years feel very long ago. And what was incredible about that was the diversity of the group of people who were in other leadership positions across sectors, in the nonprofit sector, in the corporate sector, who I would never have met because government lawyers hung with government lawyers. And in that, you know, I got to ask questions of, you know, how did you get to where you are? What does that look like on the corporate side? Not in any way of trying to leave, but just a curiosity that was very different than what I've known. And so some of my biggest sponsors have come from the nonprofit sector or from the corporate sector who I met. You know, having joined that organization, I was introduced to a number of boards. I joined a board of a non-for-profit that did work with kids on the South and West sides. And that board was diverse with people with skills. The father of someone who was on the board of directors with me took a shine to me, and he was very connected. It was on the board of the Smithsonian. And, you know, when they opened the museum in Washington, D.C., it was like, you've got to come out and you've got to see. And I met so many incredible people that I never would have met simply because of where I sat in the state's attorney's office. And so, you know, some of my biggest sponsors really have introduced me to people that I never would have met in an ordinary course of business, such that when I ran for office, it was a unique set of people that I could draw upon. And my leadership skills were really honed by watching them work in a sector very different than mine. And so it's not just one, it's been a couple of sponsors who have opened doors for me that allowed me to give talks around issues that mattered to me, who allowed me into rooms to be able to learn from, that then enhanced what I brought to the table as a supervisor in juvenile that I never would have gotten before. But there were people in the office, you know, the former chief of staff, you know, Adrian Mebane, who worked in the office, who had a very love for the people who worked there, helped me within the office. But it was really the relationships that I built outside of the office with people with a varied skill set that didn't know how the state's attorney's office worked. And so even when they would ask me questions of, well, why do you do it that way? It would force me to think critically, force me to like, why do we do that? That I wouldn't have had. So that's my biggest piece of advice, is that your sponsor, you know, if you're just looking within your organization, they probably are going to have 5, 6, 7, 8 other people who've called upon them to do that as well. Diversify and do it with passion. Find an organization, a not-for-profit, a board that tugs at your heart, that you care about, an issue that you care about and want to advocate for. Again, you're a whole person. And if you're just about how do I move up in this job, you're going to miss so much about how you develop as a person that will help you be a sponsor or a mentor to someone else as well.
That is really great advice for everyone. I think branching out and networking seems like another task, right? It's yet another thing you have to find time to do. But the connections that you can make are invaluable in terms of altering your career and also figuring out which path you should be on and finding good sponsors and mentors.
But I would say, just very quickly, do it in a way that draws at your heart, right? Like, Joan, if you care, the work that you do with the women's organizations, you care about that, right? And so that network of people, it doesn't feel like so much work, organizing an event, and then people can see your project management skills, you're learning, and it's something you care about. Networking feels arduous when it's like, let me go and I guess I got to bring my cards. That's never fun. Never fun. The fun is I care about animals and I'm going to join this group with other animal lovers, and there are people from diverse sex, and this is going to be fun for me. If it's fun, you'll commit to it, you'll stay with it, you'll be engaged. If it's work, the sponsor or mentor will feel like there's nothing to get from it from you. This is a two-way street. That you should be offering something to your sponsor and mentor just as much as you're getting from them.
And speaking of fun, this has been fun, but I fear we're at the time of our very last question. I'm going to pose it once, but ask each of you to answer individually, so I'll call on you. With regard to your greatest achievement or future goal, I'd like to ask each of you to choose one, or you can talk about both. But beginning with Michelle. Michelle, what was your greatest professional achievement, and what are you still holding out for? What do you want to accomplish?
I would say, well, while I'm proud of a number of accomplishments from, client successes, litigation successes, partnership, all that fun stuff, what I'm most proud of is having accomplished X, Y, and Z while doing it my way. I received a lot of unsolicited advice over the years about, you have to do it this way, you need to stop doing that. I was determined, apparently I have a contrarian personality, but I was determined to do it my way. I really, truly believe you're not going to succeed trying to be somebody you're not. So to me, my biggest accomplishment is being able to reach my goals while being true to myself and not being persuaded to sway from that.
Ava, same questions.
Yeah, I think my biggest achievement and what I'm most proud of is something that wasn't intentional, but it's when I took on probably my largest role as a general counsel of a prior company. And I inherited a team, a wonderful team, but it was pretty much all white men, especially at the VP level or at the top levels. And it wasn't it was intentional in the sense that I wanted more diversity, I wanted more different thought, but it wasn't intentional that I was going to build another team. And through the years, I was able to probably build one of the most diverse teams in the company, including 2 vice president women, which is something I'm just so proud of, because it was just, like I said, it wasn't necessarily intentional. Maybe, some of it was, but when I look back, I'm just, because it's such an incredible team now, and I'm so proud of them, and I'm proud that I was able to help bring that along.
Madam State's Attorney, over to you. Oh, we have an interloper. Hello, dear.
Yeah, it's gonna sound like what you've just heard. First and foremost, I work with an amazing group of lawyers and administrators and investigators that every success that our office has is because of the hard work that they do every day. And so it feels selfish to be like, well, let me tell you this work thing we did, because my name's on the door, but it is the men and women who do this work every day that bring it home, bring the gold home. But what I am proud of is the diversity of our leadership team. I remember walking into the leadership meeting on my first day and was like, wow, this is not reflective. And I will tell you 2 things. One, when I meet young girls who, shout out their buildings for me that they grew up in public housing, and see themselves in me, the reflection of that I'm there matters to me. And women who I've met throughout the office who said I could not envision sitting in that seat. it just didn't even seem like it was a possibility. And not that you're bestowed it, but that you could do it. And watching them grow and engage and really envision themselves in things beyond what they thought were available to them because I sit here. And that is it's a gift to me. That I will carry with me, because my name, my picture, whatever one, will stay hanging in the halls of the office. And it's my hope that there will be more pictures hanging in that hall that look like our community, and they believe that they can have their pictures hanging there because mine was there too.
Judge St. Eve, we opened with you and we will close with you as well. Same question.
I am incredibly proud of and have the privilege of having law clerks every year. And they are generally young lawyers coming out. Sometimes they're right out of school. Sometimes they've been practicing for a couple of years. But I'm very proud. I've had a diverse set of law clerks from school, diverse in all senses, from experience, from schools, everything. And I'm very proud that I've had a year with each of them, a couple of them a little bit more than a year, but been able to work with them to teach them hopefully the principles of civility and rule of law, and then watch them go out and grow and succeed and reach back and help others. I think all my clerks learn after spending a year in chambers of the importance of, once you get out and you're doing things, to reach back and help others, to pay it forward, as you say. And they all lead with that. So I have 19 years of law clerks who are out there doing that, and I'm proud of each one of them.
In closing, Sandra Day O'Connor once said that for both men and women, the first step in getting power is to become visible to others, and then to put on an impressive show. As women achieve power, the barriers will fall. As society sees what women can do, as women see what women can do, there will be more women out there doing things, and we will all be better for it. So in that vein, thanks to each of our panelists for putting on an impressive show and showing all of us what they can do, and for leading by example. And on behalf of the Federal Bar Association, I'd like to thank the Planning Committee, and we would all like to thank you for joining us. We would also encourage everyone who was watching the panel today to join us for our other Women's History Month programming, where we will have some of the leading advocates in the Equal Rights Amendment litigation on March 18th. Talk with you about the ongoing struggle for equality in the legal realm. But this has been a great panel, and I'm so grateful to each of you for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.
You.
Thank you for leading us.
Indeed, thank you.
Thank you.